Freedom and fear are at war. The advance of human freedom, the great achievement of our time, and the great hope of every time, now depends on us.
Michael Perenti.
Well, what we call the left is a very multivariated group of people. There are all sorts of people consider themselves part of the left. The left means moving toward progressive political change, a fair distribution of power, a fair distribution of wealth. And the left is now, of course, elements of it are in decline compared to what things were in the late 1960s. But in other ways, people have advanced. That we are looking at the fact that Columbus didn't discover America, but he invaded it. He led an invasion of it. We are looking at the fact that U.S. interventionism is not benignly intended, but it often does things that are terrible for human beings, both here and abroad. So the left, I think, has developed more critiques. Years ago, the view was that U.S. policy was stupid and tragically misled. And today, at least there are some of us on the left who argue that U.S. policy is quite rational and remarkably successful in its ability to stop social change and overthrow creative and progressive governments that try to give a fairer shake to their people, whether it be in Nicaragua or governments or movements. Nicaragua, El Salvador, Angola, Mozambique, and any number of other places, East Timor, where the effects have been terrible. And so our criticism of U.S. policy is not that it's a failure, but that it's a tragic and horrible and unjust success. There is, unfortunately, among many people on the left, a McCarthyism, an anti-communism of the left. I know when I decided I would not join in the chorus of red baiting and Soviet bashing that went on, and in fact, I wrote articles for the Communist Party USA publications, I found myself often red baited by other people on the left who were so worried about their credibility and legitimacy that they begin to practice a McCarthyism. And I'm not using the term allegorically, I mean literally McCarthyism. Opposing appointments to jobs, not inviting you for seminars or panels or whatever else, disassociating themselves, declining your articles for publication, and all sort of thing. That is, there's a real McCarthyism on the left among some people who profess to be on the left. So you do have these various shadings. Much of the left in America is really, like much of the liberals, has that same problem of worrying, leaning toward the center and worrying about their respectability and their credibility. And I don't worry about my credibility. I think the best way to have credibility is to speak what you think is the truth as forcefully and as clearly and as strongly as possible. By strongly and forcefully, I don't mean volume. I mean by marshaling up the arguments and evidence that support that position. If you can't marshal them up, there must be something wrong with the position. There still are people on the left who play active roles in public interest groups. We have had, even though it's the usual way is to see the left in decline since the 60s, we have had some remarkable victories. The growth of the environmental movement, if not a victory, is a hopeful thing. The nuclear freeze movement, which was a massive movement. The fight today for health care and things of that sort. It's not easy because the power is with those who control the high ground in our institutions and in our corporations, and the people who have the money. And so they really, we're having a hard time.
You mentioned several cases of U.S. intervention or U.S.-sponsored terrorism. How does the current situation in Somalia and the current situation in Haiti fit into the U.S. foreign policy goals?
Well, in Somalia, the real goal was, of course, to make Somalia safe for the oil corporations. I should have mentioned that in the talk here. The mainstream media have totally ignored the story about oil in Somalia. There was one remarkable article, January 18, 1993, in the LA Times, which said that 3/4 of Somalia had been conceded by the former ruler to 4 major American oil companies, Conoco, Amoco, Phillips, whatever, and that they strongly believe that there are major oil deposits in Somalia. George Bush, when he was vice president in '86, went around in Yemen and other places saying that that whole region, the whole Cape, the Horn of Africa, was very rich in oil, and they thought Somalia had really a lot of it. This explains his strange behavior as President of the United States to suddenly send troops into Somalia out of the conviction that he wanted to feed the Somalians. Now, the Somalians have had a famine for 10 years. He never moved his troops once. These Somalians, there are about 12 nations in Africa that have had drought and famine for over a decade. He hasn't done a thing. He hasn't done a single thing for any of them. So why now is he suddenly so moved that he actually sent troops? And how do you feed people with troops? You know, why do you need troops to feed them? Well, supposedly the warlords were stealing all the food for themselves or something. And in fact, the drought and the famine in Somalia was alleviating. They'd had a good crop that year. That's the other irony, not irony, but hypocrisy of it. Well, once the troops were sent, there wasn't a single U.S. official or corporate executive who ever once again mentioned oil. The word was dropped. Didn't tell anybody. And that explains why Clinton is so reluctant to leave. It's not that he might look bad. That's why he went in the first place, and that's why he's keeping the troops. He's continuing with Bush. There's oil there, man, and when there's oil, then U.S. policy becomes an instrument of the oil corporations. In fact, when the first troops arrived, they used Conoco's headquarters for their command post. And they paid Conoco rent to use the headquarters. Imagine if it was just a school or some other institution, public institution. They'd come in and just take it over and use it. But with Conoco, they paid them rent. So the American taxpayer is paying for these troops to go there to protect Conoco's oil and then paying Conoco rent to house them. It's a very good system if you're an oil company.
In Haiti?
In Haiti, I think what you have is the embarrassment that a democratically elected president is overthrown by the military, which is protecting that same ruling class and foreign investors that George Bush and Bill Clinton protect. However, what you have in Haiti is a surplus of repression. And what the CIA, I just heard that the CIA is down there talking to the military heads. I think that's very interesting. They got to clean up their act. That is, how to control Haiti so that there's no real democratic change for the masses of poor people, which is what Aristide is interested in doing. How to bring Aristide back in because he was democratically elected by these people, but keep him very confined. And by the way, if he does go back and he does become more effective and he does start mobilizing people again for change, he'll be blown away this time. They won't let him walk out with some French ambassador. How to do that, but make it look okay. Don't come across looking like a bunch of cutthroat gunmen, which is what they're doing now. So I think that's what it is. The UN observers in the U.S. were going to come down like window dressing. They even talked about we have to professionalize the police in Haiti. Professionalizing the police means be more selective in how you repress. Don't just go over to some store owner and blow his head out because you think he might be from the other side or something. And that's really all the intervention is in regard to Haiti. It's to how to prevent the social change, not to help it along.
Professor, how does this intervention compare to what happened, say, in Chile under Allende and in Guatemala under Jacobo Arbenz?
Which intervention?
The Haitian intervention. You just said that they are trying to clean up their act. Why didn't they do that when they assassinated Arbenz and Allende?
I think with Allende, too much was at stake. I mean, Allende was head of what was called a popular unity government, which was a broad base of a variety of political parties, all of which were doing things like helping the poor. There had been taken place in Chile a shift of national income, that huge portion that went to people who don't work in the form of interest and dividends, and a bigger portion of that went to people who work for wages and salaries. So there was a democratization of the economy and a bettering. The military there moved very decisively and killed Allende. You didn't have the problem of a live president walking around, coming to the U.S. Aristide is a problem. You see, when he got away, you can bet there were some guys in Langley, Virginia, in the CIA who were very, very upset. Now that he's around, he becomes a living symbol of the undemocratic oppression, the overthrow of democracy. Allende was killed, all his people were rounded up, and that was that. The goal in all these countries is to, ideally, to keep that existing social structure where 2% of the people own 80% of the land, where they control everything, where they open it up to foreign U.S. corporate investors to make as much profit off they can off the cheap labor in those countries and the natural resources in the land and all that stuff. But to legitimate it with a veneer of democracy, a window dressing of democracy. So now you even have in Chile, Pinochet's constitution is in power, where you have democratic parties in and the prime minister, and they say democracy has returned to Chile. Well, it's not really true. The constitution also says that the military will have its own budget and decide its own budget and its own policies. And that military at any time is totally unaccountable to the civilian authorities. And it could come in and blow the whistle again and do the bloodletting again, which has happened repeatedly in Argentina. You know, every so often, then they finally hold elections again because the people agitate and fight, and then all the popular forces come to the fore. They legitimate, they lay down their arms, they start working in organizations. Boom! Then comes another coup. You round them up, put them against the wall, kill them all again, and this goes on until people get very cynical about the democracy. And I think that's what's got to happen in Haiti. What they want to do is tame it, so they're not just killing. I mean, you have even people like people on Nightline upset about it, because you see, some of these people really believe that U.S. policy has something to do with helping democracy. So they get upset. They say, well, those bodies are really stacking up in Haiti. What's going on? Why should we not help Aristide? Or what's that military all about? And Clinton can't turn around and say, hey, the function of that military is to do the function of the military everywhere, which is to make the world safe for the Fortune 500, to make the world safe for the big corporate investors, and to make the world safe not only for just direct investment, but to make sure that no alternative system comes in, a system that wants to use the land, the labor, the resources, and the capital of the country in a different way rather than in the private profit way.
I'd like to continue on Haiti and quote from today's New York Times, Tuesday, October 19th. Headline, Clinton vows to fight Congress on his power to use the military. President Clinton, trying to protect his power to control the use of military force, vowed today to strongly oppose efforts by members of Congress to restrict his authority, to commit troops to restore democracy in Haiti, or to work with the United Nations and other global hotspots. Is it Bill Clinton's choice to send U.S. troops? What about the American people?
Well, let's get something clear. Clinton has not said he would use troops in Haiti to restore democracy, okay? The minute those Haitian gunmen came out and started terrorizing the U.S. members of that peacekeeping force, they tucked their tail, got in the back of the boat, and got back on the boat. And nobody was saying our credibility, our image, our willingness to show that we're strong, the way they're doing in Somalia. So they're not exactly knocking themselves out for Aristide. And he isn't sending any troops to Haiti. So this whole argument is an attempt by the Republican right to use Haiti as a way of keeping him out, keeping the U.S. out of Haiti to help Aristide. They don't want to help Aristide. The general principle is correct. I agree that Congress should have a greater control over the U.S. president, that the president should not be getting us into wars. The Constitution, Article 1 says that Congress shall have the power to declare war. And what we're getting is presidents unilaterally going in, fighting whole wars that have never even been declared, never been debated or discussed, where Congress can't even find out when the troops are, how many troops are there, why they're sent, how long they're going to be there, and all that sort of thing. That, my friends, are not a democracy. That's not a democracy. That's not the way you run things. We're not talking about quick emergency action where something has to happen instantly. There's no quick emergency action. There was no thing that they had to suddenly send all these troops to Somalia or even bother with Haiti or Bosnia or whatever else.
I was thinking that the policy in Haiti might be one where they will allow the country to sink so far down the toilet, they will then allow Aristide to come back, and he'll be able to do nothing because there will be nothing left, and then they will point to Aristide and say, see what happens when you allow leftists in power?
Well, that's already, I mean, Haiti is as far down. I mean, they even talk about not third world countries, but fourth world countries, that Haiti is one of the fourth world. That is, the term is not poverty, it's called absolute poverty or desperate poverty, where, you know, there are degrees of poverty too. And Haiti is way down there already. And most certainly that was the argument used against Allende in Chile or Arbenz in Guatemala, that in those cases they had the rationalization that there was a communist influence. With Arbenz in Guatemala, they said he was friendly to the communists, or he was the first democratically elected president of Guatemala. His real sin was that he started taking some of the unused land of the United Fruit Company and distributing it to peasants. And United Fruit Company doesn't like that. And they're the power, one of the powers, they're now United Brand, they've merged. They were the power there. And the CIA went in and overthrew him and bragged about it and said, because he was a communist, you could do that. There's a lot more consciousness today about what gives us the right, what gives this country the right to go into any country it wants to and dictate who shall or shall not be its leader. We can go in, kill thousands of the people, pluck the guy out, bring him back to the U.S. and try him on a trumped-up drug charge with Noriega, for instance, as I talked in the lecture. And what gives the leaders of this country, I don't want to say this country or us Americans, because most Americans are not clamoring, let's go in, let's go fight here, let's go fight here. Most Americans, if you ask them, are clamoring about, hey, how about helping our schools and our public hospital that's going to be closing, or the library that you got closing now, or fix up these roads, or the environment, whatever else. That's what most people in this country are concerned about. And these leaders are really, they're like the hitmen for the Fortune 500. Increasingly, our capital and our jobs are getting exported abroad, and they have to watch out for the interests of these companies abroad. So we get it both ways. One, our jobs are exported, our factories are exported, and two, we have to pay the taxes for this global empire, and three, this also leads to a colossal neglect at home, to the infrastructure at home. And that, I think, is the problem. I'm trying to remember what the original statement was and what you asked in regard to Haiti. I got away from it.
Thinking that they would drive Haiti so far down the toilet. As you say, it's already down the toilet. But then they allow Aristide back in and blame it on Aristide.
Let's cut for a second. You can go on now.
There are certain terms of political discourse that are often not used. One is class. Another is propaganda. That's something that the other guys always do. And another is ideology. Do you think that there is a U.S. ideology?
Yeah, I just wrote a book called Land of Idols, Political Mythology in America. And the opening line is something like, I don't exactly remember it, but it's something like, one of the ideological teachings in the United States is that our country is uniquely free of ideology. That itself is an ideological presumption, because in fact we're not free. There are all sorts of ideologies which have to do with the blessings of the free market, anti-communism, all these other things, that whenever the U.S. intervenes abroad, it's defending the interests of the American people, which I don't believe it is. It's helping those poor little brown and black and yellow people in those other countries, which I don't think it does. So those are all ideological and propaganda overviews as to, you know, the ideological fate in individualism as defined, and I believe in individual choice and individual way, but defining individualism as meaning you go through life and you got to go it alone, and devil take the hindmost and grab all that you can that's yours. You know, the whole ideology of greed, the whole ideology of self-interest. And I'm not against self-interest. In fact, one of my arguments is that the American people, their self-interest is being violated, that they often are voting for leaders who do not serve their self-interest, but who serve other interests. But so there are a lot of different kinds of ideologies in America. There are racist views. A lot of it doesn't have the status of ideology in that it is explicitly formulated the way an ideology is. A lot of it is implicit and just said with certain coded words and images.
I'd like to take a radical leap. I think this is tied to the notion of ideology. Sports in America. The World Series is taking place now. I just heard that 4 million people watched baseball games in Denver, Colorado this year. 60 million people watched the Super Bowl. What role do you think sports plays in U.S. ideology?
Well, I mean, there's nothing wrong with sports. Sports are great. Sports are a wonderful human activity. They're one of the few activities people do where they're not doing each other in. Well, I wouldn't say maybe football. Occasionally somebody does get badly hurt. But, and sports have always been important in almost every society from Native American Indians, ancient Greeks, Rome, whatever. But you can certainly do an analysis of the way sports are very much linked to patriotism. During the Gulf War, for instance, Bush was insistent, no, we won't suspend the Super Bowl, let's have it and all that. And he got down there, and during the part-time break, you had all these American flags and the Army, Navy, and Air Force coming out, and the celebration and the linking of national sports with national military. The same terminology is used. The military adopts all the sporting terminologies for it. During the Cold War, it was terrible the way that propaganda went on. When Nazi Germany did this in the Berlin Olympics in the 30s, we all said, "Oh, that Hitler, what is he using the sports for political purposes?" But Jesus, all the Olympics, that's the way it was done. We beat the Russians and all. And when that Soviet basketball team beat the American team back in, when it was that, 1988, 89, my God, I remember watching NBC acting like it was the end of civilization as we knew it. Talked about a Soviet juggernaut that relentlessly came forward, grinding away at our brave American players, a team that was hobbled by injury, as if the other team had no injuries. It made it sound like they were fighting the Red Army instead of a basketball team, you know. So in that sense, there is a kind of a propagandistic thing that can often come in. Another thing about sports is it's amazing in the media how much time is given to it. I mean, they're reporting the 11 o'clock news. I mean, sports gets a time segment that's about as big as the news itself. And also, the definition of sports, the distorting effects that this has on sports itself, where sports becomes defined as a mass spectator sport, that you get masses of people collected to watch these key performers, when in fact sports should be something that people themselves are doing. So what we should have is more intramural sports and those kind of things, and less big-time star sports. And the effect of the media is to do that very same thing, is to turn it into a big business where the players are treated like hunks of meat on the hook. That's it.
Professor, can you give our audience an example of the types of impediments to democratic social change that exist? Sports would be one of them. When people worry about sports scores, they're not worrying about other more important social issues. Can you think of anything else like that?
Yeah, well, let me say one more thing about sports, that what sports do is hijack our loyalties to a high-paying, high-powered team that's put together by a multimillionaire, rather than our loyalties, say, going, and our energies and attention. I mean, because you can find, when I lived in Washington, D.C., you could find people on the street who could name the whole Redskin defensive line and the Hogs, the offensive line in the backfield, and who was this, and can give you, and could talk for 2 hours perfectly informed about sports, and who didn't know a thing about politics. So it is a way of depoliticizing people, of distracting people. They said about ancient Rome, you gave them a little bit of the bread, and you gave them a lot of circuses too, to keep them happy and keep them distracted, while we fleeced them and did really very little for them. So that's the function of sports. The other impediments to social change, the answer in one word is everything. I mean, just almost everything. Much of what goes on in our schools, much of what goes on in all these institutions, they are designed most definitely not to get people to become the active social agents of their own lives, not to get people, the police. I mean, look what the police did to democratic community organizations from the late 60s through the 70s. Most of those Puerto Rican and black leaders in Chicago who were starting the Panthers and all who were starting those community organizations, those could have been very vital democratic organizations. Those communities would have been in a lot better shape than they are today. Most of those leaders are either in Marion prison or they're dead now. And the demoralization that took place in those communities, and not long after that, the drug traffickers came in, and those drug traffickers were helped by the feds, who brought them right in there and helped distribute that stuff. Because it is much safer and much better to have the poor demoralized and disorganized rather than having them well-organized, literate, moving with real leadership, and getting a fairer slice of the pie. That's the whole idea. Every dollar I got to pay to workers is one less dollar in my pocket. Every dollar I got to pay to people in a community is one less dollar in my pocket. That's the bosses. That's the owning class's view. So it was much better to have them demoralized. Crime becomes an instrument of social control. Crime actually is a way of keeping the community demoralized. The slums are not a problem. The slums are the solution. That's where you pack in the so-called underclass, the losers, and you keep them down there. That's where you keep your cheap labor reserve and the surplus people. What it tells us is that there's an inherent contradiction and tension between capitalism and democracy. That the more democracy works, the angrier capitalism will get. There's nothing we ever got. It's not capitalism that gave us this good life. In 1898, when you had the freest, most untrammeled capitalism, it was not a good life. People were dying of typhoid in Philadelphia. Children were working in factories 13 hours a day, little 10-year-olds. That was not a good life. To the extent that life has improved, it wasn't because anything, but despite what the big plutocrats and big money guys were doing. It had to fight for an 8-hour day, had to fight for the right to collective bargaining, had to fight for Social Security and pensions, had to fight for clean drinking water, for free public education. All those things had to be fought for, and that kind of fight is still going on today, and that's the fight of democracy. Democracy is a wonderful invention of the people of history. It goes back to ancient Greece, an invention by the people of history to protect themselves against the power of wealth. And that's the fight that's still going on to this very day. And let's keep fighting.
Every time now depends on us.
When freedom is lost, it is lost forever.
We are losing the right to make our own determinations about what we think, what we eat, how we protect our health, how we protect our children, and whether, in fact, we are members of a free society.
The purpose of education in America today is not education. It is indoctrination.
They have to destroy the United States Constitution and our way of life. And they've got to do so in such a way that we embrace it. We embrace it.